There's no reason to run out of musical ideas. Let's talk about it. The first reason there's no reason to run out of musical ideas is that there are so many different types of musical ideas. One of the reasons I see most often that people get really stuck when it comes to music writing is that they are stuck starting their song the same way over and over. They've never even entertained the idea that they could start writing the music of their song with anything other than the chord progression. But there are so many different types of musical ideas that you can start your song with, no matter what instruments you do or don't play. So for instance, yes, of course you could start your song with a chord progression. This is what most people do by default, so you probably didn't need to be told that. But also you can start by writing your melody first and then figure out the underlying chords or write the underlying chords after the fact. This could be something particularly good if you are more naturally gifted at writing melodies, and then you can figure out the chord progression later. Or if you're just somebody who plays an instrument that really is good at melody writing, maybe violin or flute or your voice, that's gonna come more naturally to you than writing a chord progression. If you're just starting to learn guitar, and that's the first instrument you've ever learned that actually has chords. You also can start with a musical idea that is a hook, and in this case I'm talking specifically about an instrument hook. So this could be something like a hook with your guitar, or maybe a piano riff that's interesting, or even something like a bass line. And another musical idea you can start with is just rhythm or a drum loop, whether it's a stock drum loop you find online that can really inspire your sound in a different direction. For instance, something I've done is just took a funk beat and then was like, okay, I guess I'll write something funky. It was a stock funk beat. Eventually I'll have drums recorded that aren't a stock funk beat, but it inspired a whole song in a very different direction than I would ever write. I would never sit at a piano or guitar and just improvise something funky. That's just not really something that I gravitate to naturally. But when you're listening to a drum loop that's funky, you can't help but improvise something along with it that sounds funky. And by the way, in case it's not implied by what I just said, I don't actually play the drums, and yet I still have used drum loops to inspire songs, and then I would have somebody else who actually can play drums record the actual drums for the song. But it can just be something that starts your song, is the thing that inspires the first part of your song. Even if it is something like you're gonna listen to a certain drum beat that has a feel you kind of want to write a song off of, and from there you start with a chord progression or a guitar hook. But this is something that will inspire you in wildly different directions than maybe you've ever been before, or maybe it won't, but it certainly is a great way to kickstart your inspiration and is a great type of musical idea to build your song off of. Another reason there's no reason to run out of musical ideas are there are so many different challenges that you can give to yourself that will give your creativity a boost. So one simple challenge is just to challenge yourself to write a song in a particular key. So for instance, maybe you realize, you know what, I write everything in C major. Simply challenging yourself to write something in G major or in B minor instead might actually inspire you in a wildly different direction. Now, I think this even works within the same type of key. C major versus G major can inspire you in different directions, but even more so, this is going to work if you challenge yourself to a different type of key. If you write everything in major, then try minor. If you've done everything just in natural minor and major, maybe try harmonic minor. And then you could go even further and utilize modes in your songwriting. If you've only done keys, which is major and minor, maybe you've never taken a dive into doing things like the Lydian mode or the Dorian mode or the Phrygian mode. It's okay, by the way, if you don't know what those mean. Those are more advanced music theory concepts, although they're not really that hard to understand. But it's okay if you don't understand what those are. Just know those options are out there. You can go learn what is the Phrygian mode, which by the way, I have a podcast on that. And then from there, be like, oh, okay, let me write a song off of this idea of what the Phrygian mode is, which by the way, is basically a more aggressive sounding minor key, essentially. You also could challenge yourself to utilize a new type of chord or a new music compositional concept, like say a pedal tone. So let's say that you only used major and minor chords before, and you've never really used a seventh chord in your songs or a sus sus chord or an add chord, or you've never utilized a concept like a pedal tone where you have one note that stays the same as the rest of the chords change around it, you could tell yourself, okay, in this next song or in this next song section that I write, I'm going to go out of my way and figure out a way to make a 7th chord work, or to go out of my way to utilize a sus chord. Another whole set of challenges you could usher to yourself is a new style. This could be something as small as just changing the style with which you play the guitar or improvise the guitar to start your song. If you always start your songs with a strummed chord progression with an acoustic guitar, you could change just one of those factors. Maybe you still utilize chords with your guitar and you still use an acoustic guitar, but you decide I'm going to do a finger picking pattern or a pattern with a pick. Or maybe I'm just going to utilize one hammer-on where applicable somewhere in this chord progression because I've never utilized a hammer-on in a chord progression before. Or you could change the style of chords. Maybe you always utilize open chords, so instead you use power chords, or you've never used bar chords before, and hey, maybe you're a good enough guitarist that you don't think bar chords are hard. Maybe utilize bar chords in your next song. And that, of course, is saying nothing of just changing from electric guitar to acoustic guitar, which is going to give your song a totally different feel. And even from there, you can choose the effects on your electric guitar, which again will give a totally different feel. The way you improvise with an electric guitar that has heavy distortion on it is going to be wildly different than that exact same guitar where you're improvising where it's just super washy reverbs and delays, but it's super clean. You will almost certainly not play the same way because those sounds will inspire you differently. And you can utilize a new style with piano as well. For instance, if you always utilize chords primarily, you could try writing a riff instead that's a little more melodic and a little bit more of a hook than just an underlying chord. Not to mention that you can have all sorts of wild different styles with just your left hand. There's the style of just utilizing one note in your left hand, or a first and a fifth of a chord in your left hand, or octaves in your left hand, or a different left hand pattern that you could utilize. So no matter what your instrument is, those are the only two specific instruments we'll talk about because they're the ones I know best. But whatever your instrument is, bass, violin, doesn't matter. Think about how you could change styles and write a song with a different style of instrument play than you normally would use. And reason number 3, there's no reason to run out of musical ideas, is there are millions of songs out there to inspire you. A great exercise to kickstart your inspiration is simply to take a song you really like and figure out what is it precisely about this song I like. Is it the chord progression I really like? Is it the way the guitars sound? The way the melody is done? Is there some certain music theory concept being utilized in the melody that really makes it effective to me or really pulls at my heartstrings? Or is this a song that's really built on a bass line, where the bass line is the most interesting part of the song musically, and hey, maybe you've never done that before, but you realize one of my favorite songs is one of my favorite songs because the bass line is killer, and yet you've never built a song off of a bass line. Well, there you go. Now you know. I really love this song mostly for the bass line, and I've never written a great bass line because I never tried to, so now I'm going to build a song off of a bass line. I'm going to write the bass line first and then write the rest of the song so that I give myself the best chance to have a pretty great bass line. And you also can do this with songs you generally don't like as well. You can take certain elements and be like, what is it precisely that makes me cringe at that part of the song so I can not do that thing? And you also can learn a lot by looking at a song you don't like and figuring out some of the elements that maybe you do actually kind of like within that song, and then say, I really like that the way they have their guitar sound or the guitar part that is in this part of the song. So let me figure out what they're doing, because I hate this song, but the guitar part's kind of good. So maybe I should figure out what's going on with that guitar part and take that knowledge into my next song where I try something similar. And by the way, as a songwriter, one of the most helpful things you can learn to do is learning how to take an abstract concept from a specific piece of music that you like. So if you can listen to a bass line or a guitar riff or a song and sort of identify the abstract thing you like about it. Let's say there's a certain song and it sounds really aggressive and you're like, wow, how does it sound so aggressive? If you can figure out what's the rhythmic elements that are making it sound aggressive, maybe it's in the Phrygian mode, which tends to sound like a more aggressive minor key, essentially. If you can abstract that out, then you can go write your own song that's totally original as a song can be, that's not copying that song at all, but utilizing the abstract concepts you learned from from that song. This is a great way to be able to be inspired by tons of different music without ever copying it or doing something that's morally questionable. And by the way, this is one of the many arguments for learning music theory, because it's going to be very hard to do if you don't understand music theory. With music theory, that's how you can look at something and be like, oh, it's in the Phrygian mode, that's why it sounds more aggressive. Or, oh, the way they're using the 4 chord there before they go back to the 1 chord is why it sounds so powerfully resolved. Or, oh, the reason that that part of the music sounds different and more interesting is that they actually went into the Mixolydian mode there, or they at least borrowed a chord from it. But if you don't have any of the music theory knowledge, you're just going to be like, yeah, it's music, it does a thing, and it makes me feel like, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. But outside of just copying what they did exactly, you're not going to be able to abstract out the concept that you could borrow ethically and not be just stealing from another song. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If it was, something else you'll definitely find helpful is my free guide talking about 20 different ways to start writing a song. I think a great way to stay creatively fresh and to not get into writer's block is to change up how we start our songs. If we always start with a chord progression first, or we always start with a melody first, that's often how we end up sort of in a box where all our songs start to sound the same, and it's how we end up getting sort of creatively dry. But just changing up how we start our song and just being aware of different ways we could start a song can be a great way to kickstart our creativity and never really run out of musical ideas. Even if we have drier spells, there will not be total dry spells, and your times when you are feeling creative, there will be so many ideas that you generate that it will very much be enough musical ideas that is kind of okay when the dry spells do much more rarely come. So check that out, songwritertheory.com/free guide. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'll talk to you in the next one.